The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which I remember because Tuesdays are when I do my grocery run. Same route, same store on Bloor Street, same basket of things I've been buying alone for 11 years now. I almost didn't open it. The return address was my son-in-law's law firm downtown, and anything that comes from that building hasn't been good news in a very long time. My name is Harriet Bolton. I'm 63 years old, and for most of those years I thought I understood what family meant. I thought I understood loyalty. I thought the people who sat at your table and ate your food and borrowed your car on winter mornings when theirs wouldn't start. I thought those people were yours. I was wrong about that. It took me a long time to stop being wrong about it. The letter was from my daughter, not handwritten, typed, formal, printed on cream stationery with her name embossed at the top. Sylvia Hartwell, née Bolton. She'd taken his name within 3 weeks of the wedding, faster than most people return library books. The letter informed me that she and her husband Philip were celebrating the opening of their new law practice with a dinner gala at the Fairmont Royal York in Toronto. Black tie. Saturday the 14th. She had enclosed what she called an invitation, though it didn't read like one. It read more like a summons. She wrote, "I thought it fitting that you be there, mother. Given everything. Given everything." I stood in my hallway in my coat, grocery bag still on my arm, and I read those 2 words 4 times. I knew exactly what she meant, and I knew she was expecting me to arrive, as I had left her life, quietly, with nothing, the woman her husband had spent 6 years convincing her I was. I put the letter on the kitchen counter, and I made myself a cup of tea. Then I sat down at my table, and I allowed myself, for the first time in a long while, to go back to the beginning. Philip Hartwell came into our lives when Sylvia was 27. She brought him to Thanksgiving. My house, my turkey, my mother's tablecloth that I iron every year, even though the crease in the middle never fully comes out. He was polished. That's the word I kept coming back to. Polished like a surface that's been buffed so many times there's nothing left underneath. He shook my hand and called me Mrs. Bolton and asked thoughtful questions about the neighborhood and complimented the pie. My husband Leonard was still alive then, just barely. The Parkinsons had taken most of his voice by that point, but his eyes were still sharp, and I remember him watching Philip across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. After dinner, when Philip had taken Sylvia for a walk and it was just the two of us cleaning up, Leonard said to me, slowly, carefully, the way he said everything by then, "There's something performative about that man." I told him he was being unfair. I wish I had listened. Leonard passed 8 months later. February, cold and quiet, the way death in Canada often is. Sylvia came home for the funeral, and Philip came with her, and he was everything you'd want in a son-in-law during a time like that. Organized. Efficient. He handled the funeral home paperwork because I couldn't stop shaking long enough to hold a pen. He spoke beautifully at the service. Several of our neighbors told me afterward how lucky Sylvia was. That was the year everything changed, though I didn't see it happening. You never do, I think, when someone is slowly turning the people you love against you. They don't announce it. They do it gently, sideways, in small adjustments to the story. The first thing I noticed was that Sylvia stopped calling on Sundays. We'd had a Sunday call tradition since she left for university in Guelph. Nothing long, sometimes just 15 minutes, but it was hours. Then the calls got shorter. Then they moved to email. Then the emails got more formal. By the time a full year had passed since Leonard's funeral, I was receiving messages that read like they'd been drafted by someone who'd taken a course in polite distance. I tried to visit. Twice I drove the 4 hours to Ottawa, where they'd settled, and both times something came up. A work commitment for Philip, a conflict in Sylvia's schedule. The second time, I sat in my car outside a Tim Hortons on the 417 for 40 minutes before turning around and driving home. I didn't understand what was happening. I went over everything in my mind, Every conversation, every possible slight, every moment I might have said the wrong thing. Mothers do that. We inventory ourselves, looking for the damage, assuming if something's broken, it must be because of something we did. It was my neighbor Janet who finally said what I couldn't see. She'd been married to a family lawyer for 30 years, and she had a way of saying difficult things gently, but without softening them so much they lost their shape. She said, "Harriet, does Philip control a lot of what happens in that household?" I said I didn't know. She said, "Then that's your answer. What came next happened over 3 years, and I'm going to tell you the shape of it because I can't tell you every detail. Some of it I still don't fully know, and some of it I know too well to say out loud without my hands starting to shake. Philip told Sylvia that I had interfered with Leonard's estate, that I had moved money before Leonard died in ways that weren't transparent. This was not true. Leonard had a simple will and a simple RRSP and a simple house that he left to me, as we had always planned together. There was nothing complicated. There was nothing hidden. But Philip was an estate lawyer, and he had language for things. And he used that language on my daughter until she started looking at me the way you look at someone you're not sure you can trust. He told her I had disapproved of her from the beginning, that I had said things to him privately at that first Thanksgiving dinner, supposedly, that revealed my true feelings about her choices. He was specific about it. He named a particular comment I apparently made about her apartment in Ottawa, about her career in nonprofit work, about her decision not to have children. He had details, dates. He had constructed a version of me so thorough that I barely recognized myself in it. But Sylvia knew me for 27 years before she met him. I kept thinking that would be enough. I kept thinking the Sylvia who used to fall asleep in the back seat while I drove her home from skating practice, the Sylvia who called me from Guelph crying over a march she thought was unfair, the Sylvia who let me hold her hand during her father's last hour. I kept thinking that woman would find her way back to me. She didn't. Not for a long time. What she did instead was stop returning my calls entirely. My sister tried to reach her. A cousin tried. Each time there was a polite response from Philip's email account explaining that Sylvia needed space and that the family would appreciate if her boundaries were respected. Her boundaries. The word was right, but the shape of it was all wrong. I took down the framed photo of us from my hallway. Not because I stopped loving her, because I couldn't walk past it 20 times a day anymore without something in my chest caving in. Here's what I did instead of falling apart. I want to say that clearly because I've heard enough stories that end with the woman falling apart, and this is not one of those. I had worked my whole adult life as a bookkeeper. Small businesses, mostly, the kind that hire someone reliable and loyal and never pay them quite what they're worth. For 32 years, I kept other people's numbers straight. After Leonard died and Sylvia disappeared and the house felt like a museum of a life I used to have, I did something I should have done 15 years earlier. I went back to school. Not a degree program. I was 56. I wasn't interested in sitting in a lecture hall with 20-year-olds. But there was a professional development program through CPA Ontario, and a woman in my building had taken it and said it changed her earning trajectory completely. I enrolled. I studied at my kitchen table from 7 to 9 every night while the rest of the street went quiet. I passed my modules. I updated my credentials. And then I left the small businesses behind, and I went to work for a mid-sized accounting firm in the financial district. Bay Street adjacent, as they say. The kind of place where people wear good shoes and speak quietly in glass offices. I was good at it. Better than good. I had something that the younger staff didn't, which was the knowledge that numbers always tell a story, and the story is always about people. I understood that because I had spent 3 decades in rooms with small business owners when things were going badly, and I knew how to read what the numbers meant about a life. Within 2 years, I was managing a team. Within 4, I was a senior manager. I bought a condominium on the waterfront. Not the flashiest building, but clean and high and mine, with a view of the lake that I still haven't gotten used to even after 3 years. I did not do any of this to impress anyone. I want to be clear about that. I did it because the alternative was to become a woman who waited, and I refused to wait. I had waited long enough. 6 years after Sylvia's last real conversation with me, the letter from the Fairmont arrived on my grocery Tuesday. Given everything. I sat with it for 3 days. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Janet, not my colleague Rosemary, who had become something like a friend, not my sister out in Kelowna. I just sat with it and I thought about what Sylvia was expecting when she sent it. She was expecting me to either not come, which would confirm whatever story Philip had told about me being cold and distant and absent, or she was expecting me to come the way I had always come. Quietly, apologetically, dressed in my best blouse from Reitman's, grateful for the invitation, careful not to take up too much space. She was not expecting what I actually did. I called Rosemary. She had connections I didn't, specifically a friend who managed client relations at one of the largest Bay Street firms, and through that friend I was able to arrange something I had never in my life arranged before. It was not cheap, and it was not practical, and when I told Rosemary what I was planning, she went silent for 4 full seconds before she said, "Harriet, do it." On the Saturday evening of the gala, I did not drive myself to the Fairmont in my sensible gray Civic. I arrived in the chauffeured black Cadillac Escalade, the kind that corporate clients use for airport transfers when they want to make an impression without saying a word about it. My colleague's firm had accounts with 3 different executive car services, and a favor was called in. The driver wore a suit. He opened my door. I wore a navy dress I'd bought at Holt Renfrew the week before. Not flashy. I am 63 years old and I don't do flashy, but the cut was right and the fabric was right, and when I put it on, I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who had remade her life entirely and wasn't apologizing for any of it. My hair was set, my heels were real. I had a small beaded clutch that had belonged to my mother. When the car pulled up to the main entrance of the Royal York, I gave myself one moment. Just one. I thought about Leonard, about his tired eyes watching Philip across my mother's tablecloth. I thought about what he might have said to me in that moment if he'd been able to say things easily. I thought he would have straightened my collar and told me to go in. So I went in. The gala was in the Fairmont's main ballroom, chandeliers, round tables with white linen, the kind of event that Toronto professional circles do extremely well when they want to announce themselves. There were perhaps 120 people, a string quartet near the entrance, wait staff moving through the room with champagne on trays. I took a glass. I did not need it, but the weight of it in my hand was grounding. I saw Philip first. He was standing near the bar with 3 other men, all in dark suits, all laughing at something. He had the posture of a man who believed the room belonged to him, which is a particular kind of posture I've learned to recognize. Chin slightly up, weight settled back on his heels, one hand in his pocket. The posture of a man who has never seriously considered that he might be wrong. He hadn't seen me yet. I saw Sylvia across the room near a table of women I didn't recognize. She was wearing a burgundy dress and she had her hair up, and for a moment she looked so much like herself at 22 that something moved through my chest that I don't have a clean name for. Not anger, not grief exactly, something older than both. It was a woman beside Sylvia who saw me first. I don't know who she was. She said something, I was too far away to hear it, and Sylvia turned. The room didn't go silent. Rooms rarely actually go silent. But I watched her face go through 6 things in approximately 4 seconds, and the thing it landed on was not the thing Philip had prepared her for. She had expected me broken, or absent, She had not expected me standing in the entrance of the Fairmont Royal York in a Holt Renfrew dress with a champagne flute in my hand and 11 years of rebuilt life behind my eyes. She took a step toward me. Then she stopped. Then she looked past me toward the entrance, at the Escalade still idling at the curb through the glass doors, at the driver who was waiting in case I needed anything. Philip reached her before I did. I watched him put his hand on her arm, not affectionately, the way husbands do when they want to include you. Firmly, the way you steady someone you don't want to move. He turned her slightly away from me, said something in her ear, and her expression went careful. I had seen that expression before. I had just never been able to name it until now. I walked toward them anyway. Philip turned and saw me, and his whole face did something I hadn't expected. He had been prepared for a 63-year-old bookkeeper from a bungalow in Etobicoke who would stand at the edge of her daughter's party and be grateful not to be turned away. He had not been prepared for what I actually was. He said, "Harriet, you came." I said, "You'll have to forgive the entrance. My assistant recommended the car service. I didn't have an assistant, but I had Rosemary, which is close enough, and the point was not the truth of it. The point was the look on his face when I said it. Sylvia said nothing. She was watching me the way you watch someone you're trying to recalibrate. I said, 'Congratulations on the firm. Your father would have been proud of you, Sylvia.' It was the most deliberate sentence I have ever constructed in my life. I chose every word. Your father, not my husband, not Leonard, not anything that made it about me. Just a simple, true thing, aimed directly at the 6-year gap in my daughter's life where her mother used to be." Her eyes filled up. She didn't let it spill. Philip's hand tightened on her arm. I stayed for exactly 2 hours. I spoke with people I didn't know, and I answered their questions about what I did, and I watched the understanding move through the room, through the junior lawyers and the articling students and the firm's other guests, that the woman who had arrived in the Escalade was not what anyone had assumed. Near the end of the evening, Sylvia found me alone by the window that looked out onto Front Street. The city was doing what Toronto does on a clear October night, going golden and orange in the distance, the CN Tower lit up in something seasonal. She said, "I didn't know you'd done all this." I said, "You didn't ask." The silence between us wasn't comfortable, but it was honest, which was more than we'd had in 6 years. She said, "He told me things about you." I said, "I know." She said, "I believed him." I looked at her, my daughter, the girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat, the woman standing in a burgundy dress at her husband's gala, trying to find the version of her mother that matched the one in front of her. I said, "I know that too." What I didn't say was, "I forgive you," because that night I didn't. I want to be honest about that. I had worked too hard and been too quiet for too long to perform a forgiveness I hadn't yet arrived at. What I said instead was, "I'd like to have coffee when you're ready, not before." And I put down my champagne glass, and I picked up my mother's beaded clutch, and I walked out through the Fairmont's main doors into the cool October air where my driver was waiting. I want to tell you what came after, because I know that's what you're wondering. Philip did not collapse. I want to be clear about that. He's not the kind of man who collapses. He's the kind who recalibrates quietly and strategically and finds a new way to manage the situation. When I left that night, I knew he was already revising the story. But something had shifted. I could feel it, the way you can feel a change in pressure before weather moves in. Sylvia called me 3 weeks later. Not an email, not a letter on cream stationery. She called on a Sunday at the time we used to call each other. I let it ring once before I picked up. We talked for 47 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on my kitchen wall, the one that Leonard picked out at a garage sale in 2003, and that I've kept even though the second hand sticks a little. She told me some of what he had said. Not all of it. I don't think she could say all of it yet, and I wasn't going to push. She said she had started talking to a counselor. She said there were things she was trying to understand. I listened. I didn't say I told you so. I don't have any interest in being right in a way that costs my daughter more than she's already paid. What I said, near the end, was, "You know who you are, Sylvia. Whatever he told you about me or about yourself, you know who you are underneath it. You've always known." She cried then. And I let her, the way you let someone cry when the crying is doing something necessary. We didn't fix anything that Sunday. I don't think 6 years of carefully constructed damage gets fixed in 47 minutes on a phone call. But we started. That's something. After 11 years of knowing what starting over felt like, I understood better than most people that starting was often the hardest and most important part. I drove to my office the following Monday morning in my gray Civic. The Escalade was a one-time thing, and I have no interest in pretending to be something I'm not. I parked in my spot in the building's underground garage. I took the elevator to the 14th floor. I poured myself a coffee from the machine in the break room, and I sat down at my desk and got back to the work of being exactly who I had made myself into. Some mornings that's enough. Some mornings it's everything. What I know now, that I didn't know when Philip first walked through my door with his polished surface and his Thanksgiving questions, is that the people who try to erase you are counting on you to help them do it. They need you to stay small. They need you to stay silent. They need you to keep standing at the edge of rooms, grateful for the invitation. I am 63 years old. I have ironed the crease out of my mother's tablecloth every November for 40 years. I kept other people's numbers straight when my own life was falling apart. I buried my husband in February and drove 4 hours home alone in the dark and got up the next morning and figured out what came next. I am not small. I was never small. I just forgot for a while that I got to decide that for myself. I didn't forget again.